Hey guys, welcome back to Back Pocket Game Reviews, and today we're going to talk about a ReviewTechUSA video that went up recently that I honestly couldn't disagree with more. So he did another video about the Nintendo Switch SD card where he was actually going on about another person's article that they had written, and in that article the person compared the Switch to a couple of different things. And ReviewTechUSA used certain arguments to try to show his disagreement for the particular argument he was making. So, at one point, the guy had mentioned that essentially it's kind of like a smartphone where, you know, we've had SD cards and used SD cards on our smartphones for a very long period of time, which is very true. I have my smartphone right here. It has 64 gigs internal. I also have a 64 gig SD card, micro SD card, plugged into my smartphone. Then he also went on to use a certain smartphone to compare it to, and he says this is a mid-range smartphone. It's the Asus Zenfone, which I have an Asus Zen Pad, which is my tablet, which I was actually going to bring down for this, but I just decided not to use it because I don't really need to for the argument that I'm going to make. So he shows off the Asus Zenfone, which uses a Intel Atom processor, and it's $179.99. Keep in mind it's a low-end smartphone. It's not anything special. There's no bells and whistles really to an Asus phone. Asus tends to put a lot of bloatware on their devices. Again, I know this. I have one of their tablets, and there's an insane amount of bloatware on it. Now, comparing that particular smartphone, it had more internal storage at $179 than what the Switch does at $300. But your issue is when you're comparing something with an Intel Atom processor, which is one of the lowest end processors you can get in an Android device. No offense to Intel, but their processors just aren't that great. They don't even support Pokemon Go. There's a lot of stuff that isn't supported with the Intel line of processors on mobile. Intel does make great products, but they make great PC products. They don't make great smartphone products. They don't make great tablet products. Their mobile line of processors leaves a lot to be desired. So he compared it to this phone, which you got to keep in mind. The Switch A has the nunchucks, or not the nunchucks, the Joy-Cons that come with it, which have, you know, the distance sensing software and all that stuff inside of it, or the hardware to do that. So there's a lot more technology that's going into the sides of those little Joy-Cons, so that that's going to justify a higher price. And you also kind of have to look at it in this route. That's also got an NVIDIA Tegra processor inside the Switch, whereas this thing has an Intel Atom. That Atom is going to be a pretty big part of the cost of why. So the processor is the biggest part of the cost for why something's going to cost that much. So, like, obviously you have a higher end smartphone, you're going to get a better screen, and you're going to typically get better processor. Those are going to be your big arguments there. So that kind of nulls out that entire argument, because you're paying more because you're getting a fan inside. It's going to have more hardware inside of it, with the different Joy-Cons and what all they support and can do, but it also is going to have a better graphics processor inside. The Tegra processor, if you were to compare it to an Atom, is going to cost quite a bit more, even just from that standpoint. Then let alone with them having to build in, sorry, it's really sunny outside, that's kind of why I'm squinting. But you can't really compare the two. I would say that the Switch, again, with the SD card, I get where a lot of people are upset. Oh, it should have had internal storage. Oh, the 3DS had internal had a SD card with it. That's because the 3DS didn't actually have internal storage. You couldn't store stuff on the 3DS without the SD card. You needed the SD card for the 3DS. Which he does go on to compare it to a dedicated console, which is, you know, the point of the Switch. It is a dedicated gaming platform. Again, which 3DS didn't even have internal storage. You had to have the SD card. Or in the likes of the PS Vita, do you know how much those PS Vita memory cards cost? They were insanely high priced, and you needed them to play a lot of different games. So when you look at it from the instance of like the PS Vita, what, a 64 gig card was going for like $100 at one point? That's outrageous. Nintendo's at least being nice and going, here, we're not even going to use proprietary memory. We're going to let you pick out of this universal memory format. So I don't see a problem with what Nintendo's doing. I can't believe that Rich at ReviewTechUSA is making this big of a deal out of it. I mean, even when you look at the Xbox 360, certain Xbox 360 games, so if you would have bought a Xbox 360 that didn't actually have the internal hard drive or the hard drives inside of them, some of those Xbox 360s, some of the games actually would require a hard drive later in the life. Like Grand Theft Auto actually required an install, or Halo 4 required an install for you to be able to play the full game. So I don't see that as a valid argument to why the Switch should have had a higher rate of internal memory. I mean, even if you look today at like the PS4 and the Xbox One, they didn't have that much internal memory. I mean, most of us typically have some form of external hard drive hooked up to either one of our consoles. I have a 2 terabyte Western Digital My Passport hooked up to my PS4 Pro, and that's got a terabyte inside. And I also have my Xbox One S, which also has a terabyte inside, except the Battlefield Edition, and that has a 3 terabyte hard drive hooked up to it. I have 54% storage left. That means I have a little under 2 terabytes available on my Xbox One right now. And that's with me having that extra drive on there. And I barely put anything on the actual system, because the more you put on the system and the lower and lower the memory, or the lower the storage gets, the slower and slower your user interface is going to run. So I typically try to go to my external storage first, just to kind of let the operating system and everything run a little bit smoother. So again, I don't see this as a problem. This is just sort of how today's market is. You need more storage. It's a part of, I wouldn't even call this a problem, especially when they're using a cheaper form of storage. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, they could have built more in. Yeah, they could have built more in. It also would have raised the cost. I don't know if you remember this, but a lot of people were really upset over the Switch actually costing $300. That upset some people. That was something people were enraged about, was the price on the Switch. They tried to keep it as low as they can. That's something Nintendo has always done, is tried to make sure that their console is affordable and approachable. I'm not a Nintendo fanboy. I have given Nintendo endless amounts of flack in my life, and there's been generations of Nintendo stuff I just didn't own. I didn't play. There's generations of Pokemon games I never touched. There's Mario games I've never picked up and I've never played. My kids obviously like to play them, so a lot of that stuff is stuff that I'll get for them and that I don't necessarily play myself. But I really feel like this is like one of those witch hunts to where it's just not practical to be going after Nintendo. And I get that I've already done a video on this. He already had done a video on this when he made his second one. But I watched this video last night and I had to actually add my 2 cents to this, where the comparisons that he made aren't accurate or effective comparisons. Sure, if you compare it to a PC, you can add as many hard drives as you want. You typically have a pretty decent sized hard drive already with it. But when you're looking at actual consoles currently, a dedicated gaming platform, most of them don't, like Xbox, PlayStation, 3DS, Vita, none of them are having enough storage coming with them. You have to get some form of external storage. And I get it, so if you buy the card, oh, why does it need the external storage? Well, that's because there's going to be extra stuff that has to download with it. And a lot of people are upset about that. Even your PlayStation games all save to the hard drive. It is faster to run it from the hard drive than it is to run it from Blu-ray. That's the whole point. That's why everything runs on internal storage. But there's also a lot of times where a lot of the content wasn't actually on the disc. It had to download to go into it. That's why you have all these day one patches now. Extra content that they didn't have time to finish by the time they printed the disc. So it's essentially like a buffer room for them to not miss release date. But every console does that. Every game does that. This is nothing new. None of this should bother anyone. This has been going on for a long period of time, and for some reason with the Switch, we're having a witch hunt over it, which makes absolutely no sense to me. I think the Switch is incredible. I don't really compare it to like the Xbox or the PlayStation. It's kind of its own category right now, because it is a console that I can hook up to my TV, and I don't agree with it being a portable that hooks up to my TV, because it is still putting out better graphics than last gen's consoles. It's not putting out current gen's consoles graphics, but it is doing better than what an Xbox 360 or a PS3 would have put out. But I can also pick it up and take it with me. So I would still go ahead and say it's a home console, not a portable that hooks up to a TV, which he made an argument against that as well, which I disagreed with. Again, I still like Rich of ReviewTechUSA. I have never watched a video that I've disagreed with more or felt that the points were just super invalid. So this is my response to that. I had to touch on that. But guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. I'll be having plenty more content going up for you soon, so be sure to stick around, and I'll see you all soon.